knows a lot about the science stuff. Professor Dave explains.
In the biochemistry series and biology series, we learned about how cells function and what it means for something to be alive. There are many different types of living organisms, and we've covered a few of these in greater detail as well. In the microbiology series, we talked about many types of unicellular organisms, both commensal and pathogenic. In the botany series, we talked about plants in all their various forms and how they interact with their environment. The other broad category of living things, and the one that we are most familiar with since we belong to it, is the group of organisms we call animals. Animals have a complicated evolutionary history and a surprisingly diverse variety of survival strategies. To understand all of the intricacies of the animal kingdom, we need to study zoology. Now, any study of zoology requires at least a basic understanding of biochemistry and biology, as well as certain concepts from anatomy and physiology as a prerequisite. So much of the introductory information in those subjects will be presumed here. But don't worry if you're a little rusty. When an important topic in those areas comes up, you can click on the cards that appear in the corner of the screen and jump to a tutorial in one of those playlists so that you can review those concepts in detail. After all, only once we understand the building blocks of life can we explore the diversity of living things, and zoology studies an enormous part of that diversity. So what does zoology mean precisely? Well, the term zoology comes from the Greek words zoion, meaning animal, and logos, meaning the study of. So, the study of animals. Pretty straightforward, right? But then again, what is an animal exactly? You'd think it would be obvious, and of course it usually is. For example, a dog is clearly an animal, and a palm tree is clearly not. But what about a sponge? A sponge doesn't really look like an animal. From a distance, corals kind of look like rocks. Bryozoans look like blobs, and giant pyrosomes, or colonies of free-floating tunicate clones, look otherworldly. And yet, all these things are animals. To go even further, what about amoebas, and paramecium, and giardia? They all kind of look like animals, but they're not. It gets even more confusing when we talk about stentor, vorticella, and rotifers. Superficially, they all look similar, but rotifers are animals, while stentor and vorticella are not. Clearly, we need a way to define animals before we can study them. Though the delineation between animal and non-animal can sometimes be very tricky, many zoologists consider an animal to be any living organism that meets the following 6 criteria. Number 1, animals are eukaryotic, meaning they consist of cells that possess a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. This word eukaryotic should be very familiar, so if it isn't, please check out my biology tutorials on eukaryotic cells before moving forward. Number 2, animals are heterotrophic, meaning they primarily get their energy by eating other things, unlike the plants we learned about in the botany series, which can make their own food. Number 3, animals are capable of aerobic respiration, which means that breathing oxygen is a requirement for energy production and therefore survival. This includes aquatic organisms, which actually do breathe oxygen that is dissolved in water instead of oxygen that is present in the air. If you need a refresher on the very complicated process that is aerobic respiration, visit my biochemistry tutorials on this subject as well. Number 4, animals engage in sexual reproduction. Believe it or not, even sponges do this, though it is quite a bit different from what one typically envisions when this action is mentioned. My biology tutorials on mitosis and meiosis will be crucial review here. Number 5, animals are free-moving or motile at least some point in their lives. Even things like sponges, which can't move freely or swim as adults, are able to move around as little baby sponges. And number 6, animals grow from a hollow sphere of cells known as a blastula. This last one is a little more complex than the others, but a blastula is essentially an embryo in a very early stage of development, when it is pretty much just a hollow ball of cells. We discussed this when introducing the evolution of multicellular life in the biology series, and animals start off as fertilized zygotes that grow into blastulas. Now, of course, there are a few animals that break these rules. The shilly-shally worm, for example, has no digestive tract at any point in its life and survives entirely off of its photosynthetic symbionts. In addition, a few species of gastrotrichs are able to survive in stagnant pools of anaerobic mud. And at least one species of myxozoa, which are parasitic cnidarians, have not only lost their mitochondrial genomes, but are entirely incapable of aerobic respiration, meaning they can't even breathe oxygen. So then, how are these things animals? The answer is in their evolutionary history. Due to extensive DNA analyses, myxozoans, for example, have been determined to share recent common ancestry with the cnidarians. Their ancestor was a free-living cnidarian, almost like a miniature jellyfish, that shared all of its characteristics with other cnidarians, before their descendants, the myxozoans, evolved to fit a parasitic lifestyle. So they're cnidarians, and they're animals, even if they no longer share all of the characteristics of other animals. Likewise, all animals share common ancestry. You and me, cats and dogs, lobsters, termites, even sponges and parasitic worms, we all share common ancestry. Therefore, an animal could perhaps be most accurately defined as any organism that is descended from the first organism that could be categorized as an animal. This phylogenetic view of an animal is key to zoology and is sometimes encapsulated in the so-called tree of life. This is another thing we discussed in the biology series, so let's move forward and revisit that concept now.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel for more tutorials. Support me on Patreon so I can keep making content. And as always, feel free to email me, ProfessorDaveExplains@gmail.com.